Hey everybody, I'm Jack,
And I'm Alex.
and welcome back to our ranking of the Soulsborne bosses based on quality. After taking on the demons of Boletaria, in today's video we're going to visit Lordran and rank the bosses of the objective fan favorite, Dark Souls. As the sort of breakout game in the series, Dark Souls manifested quite the name for itself, and from the masterclass combat and world design to the not so much late game, Dark Souls is quite the unique experience, and its replayability makes it stand out from the others. The 2018 remaster from Virtuos, while being less a remaster and more a port with pretty gnarly magic graphics, gave us all a version to enjoy on any platform, and really gave me a true feel for the game. I mean, yeah, Blighttown wasn't this. And even though we personally think Dark Souls is the worst of the 5, it's also one of our favorite games. And if you don't believe me, check out my level 177 New Game Plus 5 run, with, of course, the Xanthus Crown, the only item in Fashion Souls that truly gives the Thrallhood a run for its money. In all seriousness, Dark Souls / Dark Souls Remastered is a generational game, and as all Souls games has stood the test of time, so with that aside, let's get into the ranking. The Bed of Chaos really received the short end of the stick, or rather didn't even receive the stick, it just got shoved right back up Miyazaki's butthole in hopes that it would end up okay. Did it? No, it's a tree with nutsacks that shoots fire. And to defeat it, you burst its baby makers, tightrope a branch, then kill a bug. You can go for either one of its Ghiblies first, it's generally a cakewalk and doesn't matter, just be wary of its absurdly high damage swings and take caution as the iframes and hitboxes on those things are bullshit. Each Kahone ignites a half of a flame bird tree, I guess, that gives it pyromancy, and hey, that actually makes sense, as in terms of the storyline, the Bed of Chaos is all that's left of the once powerful Witch of Izalith. What a disastrous fall from grace though. She's one of the cooler characters in the lore and they reduced her into the second, or third, or fourth, or even fifth best tree fight in the series if we're counting enemies. But yeah, back to the sapling. At this point you'd be questioning why it gets so much hate. Then you step outside and realize the floor breaks under you with no tells. And this lovely little shrub absolutely adores sweeping you right back into the black abyss that is the floor below. And let's not forget, once you pop a testy, it also gains the ability to ignite chaos firestorms right under you, around you, all while swinging at you, and once again it forces platforming in an action RPG, which for one is ridiculous, but second, as salt to the wound, the floor breaks in the same pattern, which I guess you could memorize, but that does about as much for you as it doesn't even explain why they're the worst boss in the game. I have one single positive for this fight though, and I just want to get it out of the way. It saves your progress. Kinda. The arena and such resets, but once you enter a new phase it saves up to that point, so shout out Miyazaki for doing the bare minimum. That being said, trying to get over to the other gonad, even from the halfway point, takes me forever. I always die multiple times each playthrough trying to do this alone, and for reference, nothing really changes once you break the second ball, just the actual opening to kill the thing opens up. Which leads me into the third and final phase. I'd actually say your best bet is to just kill yourself and restart from the middle, as this is nothing more than a straight run and prayer roll that is damn near impossible to land from any other angle than dead center. And once you land safely on the oddly mapped out middle branch, it's a sprint to the heart of the tree, wherein you're greeted with a bug. It dies in one punch in new games, so I always do that, but as I learned the hard way, it does not die in one punch on progressive playthroughs, so for your sake, take it from me, just use the Black Knight Halberd and put this thing out of its misery.
If there's one thing I hate in boss fights, it's when they fight you with normal enemies in the mix. If there's one thing I hate even more, it's when the enemies happen to be the annoying fucking piece of shit dogs. If there's one thing I hate even more, it's when there are two of them. I can't even begin to comprehend the rationale for designing this diabolical encounter. Rather than a challenge, it just feels like the result of developer cruelty and malice toward the player. That's supplemented by the overly long route to get back to it that is the Lower Undead Burg, which by the way is also littered with assorted goons and thugs and miscreants and of course dogs. Anyways, the most memorable part of this fight is the arena, which is incredibly weird. It's this tiny little alleyway with a staircase to nothing and a small wooden ledge next to it. And due to its minuscule size, whether you come out alive or not all comes down to how generous the game is feeling. Sometimes the dogs were somewhat passive, or in my case just clipped into the wall and stayed there for a while. If that happens, and the real bosses of the place are dealt with, you just make a beeline for the stairs and regain your bearings for fighting the Capra Demon himself. He's pretty basic, just swings his big machete at you and you dodge, and his health pool is on the light side too, so he usually goes down pretty smooth once you hit your stride. If either the dogs were removed or the arena was larger, this fight would merely be unremarkable. But these two irritations combined makes for a teeth-grindingly frustrating monstrosity that no man should have to suffer. His placement in the early game surely drove many players away from the series, and even though he's optional, and while he's not that bad on his own as the Demon Ruins showed, the nasty brew of a pint-sized arena with 2 dogs and a boss too quick for said arena is more than fair reasoning for this spot.
This is one of the more questionable bosses in the game. When I think Centipede Demon, I think Orange Chartering, and that's predominantly the sole reasoning for its existence, both with the plot and the game. It's got a small health pool for a late game boss and is fairly easy with ample roll spam, but poor AI can make this a nightmare. Sometimes he refuses to come anywhere near you and sits in the lava throwing punches from a distance. This time around I got lucky, he sprinted right for the tiny island you're stuck on, which leads me to say the arena design sucks. The overall arena is a giant lava pool with smaller land masses, but unless you got the ring mid-fight by chopping off the demon head bug, you're stuck on said tiny island, which he takes up about half of, and combined with the random blend of motion that are his attacks, it boils down to a DPS test. And by the way, watch out for the jump attack. That thing hits like a friggin' train, and for comparison is the same as Ludwig's from Bloodborne, except it's up to random chance where he lands. So yeah, while not being particularly challenging or complete bullshit like the other two so far, I got no idea what the hell is ever going on with this fight, and for that alone, it deserves a bottom 3 spot.
Alright, I managed to keep myself in check talking about the Penetrator back in our Demon Souls video, but you guys gotta indulge me here. This name is just too horrible to ignore. Ceaseless Discharge. Ugh. And just like his name, he himself is pretty hard to ignore. He's huge. You turn a corner and the first thing you see is his ugly mug staring back at you, creepily doing absolutely nothing. He only gets pissed once you loot his dead sister's clothes off her corpse and make a beeline for the fog gate. From here you have 2 options. One is to fight him head on, and one is to run like a bitch. If you're like 99% of people, you'll take the running route. All you do is sprint as fast as you can until you reach a pit he has to jump over, and he manages to get a single hand on the ledge keeping him up. Just whack it until his grip is broken and he tumbles to his doom. This way is definitely easier, but is unreliable, as he has a tendency to randomly slam his arms around and discharge all over you. This usually results in death or near death and screws up your jog pretty badly, so you're better off saving time and hucking yourself off the cliff into his lava splooge. On the other hand, if you choose to take him on the way he was probably intended to be, he's just boring and sorta irritating. The arm slams aren't too bad to avoid, but his lava feels unfair a lot of the time and does quite a bit of damage. So really you just pick your poison here, a boring run or an awkward face-off. No matter how you slice it, this boss is just lame.
Moonlight Butterfly, you boring bitch. This is the rare Souls fight that can actively make you sleepy, and as long as we're not counting the Red Dragon from Demon Souls, this is far and away the most monotonous boss in a Souls game. She stays in the air for upwards of 2 minutes at a time, being completely unhittable to melee weapons and only keeps you focused through random magic attacks, most notably the laser, which can hit hard but also is easy to dodge with decent timing. And if my gameplay doesn't show, dying to this thing is a challenge. I chugged all my Estus for 0 reason and emoted for like half the time and still came out with a fair chunk of vigor. Once again, she floats around for a few minutes and after a while conveniently comes down to your level. I'm not sure why she does this though. Is it the plants? Or maybe, just maybe, it's lazy design. I guess we'll never know, but unless you fight her late on, you have to get to this point at least twice, and it's fine as she's just a sitting duck, but the AoE at the end can do some serious damage if you're not careful. Even though she's optional and serves no other purpose than protecting an ember and being a creation of Seath, the Moonlight Butterfly is a pretty terrible boss fight, and to say the least, an absolute snooze fest at that.
He's the Asylum Demon, but tankier and more annoying. For starters, you automatically take a heap of fall damage entering his arena, which I think is absolute BS. Secondly, the attack where he hits the wall and spawns an explosion by you is pure evil. It's one of the weirdest attacks in the series, and I still don't really get how it works. So, I find the best way to handle him is to stay behind and bait his super punishable booty stomp move. That's about all there is gameplay-wise. In every other category, he's just sorta bland. He looks identical to the Asylum Demon and has no real story. I guess he's called Stray because he wandered into the basement of the asylum or something? Not really sure. But yeah, this is definitely the most outright unoriginal boss in the series, but he gets past the garbage behind him because he at least isn't incredibly frustrating and is pretty close to a bonfire. Still, FromSoft really should have just left its chest with a Titanite slab down here instead of this random reskin ripoff.
The fire texture looks nice. No, I mean, well, there's nothing I got that hasn't already been said. This is pixel for pixel the exact same fight as the Stray Demon, except he looks a bit cooler, and has a better backstory, which makes it even more disappointing. The Demon Fire Sage was the last known master of fire sorcery and the first engulfed by the Chaos Flame, hence his close proximity to the Witch of Izalith. As her guardian and as the last known demon pyromancer, this at least deserves a unique boss fight, but he suffered the same fate as basically the entire latter half of the game, a lazily put together filler that serves as nothing more than content fodder.
The most mocked boss in Dark Souls history, poor Pinwheel has become the butt of just about every joke regarding weak difficulty since his inception. Not to say it isn't fair though, I myself killed him with literally one attack, and Jack had a similarly easy time as shown here. He clones himself and fires balls of energy at you. That's about it. It's a shame he's such a pushover, since he's set up to be pretty cool. Also, the cutscene before the fight is really ominous. You drop into a huge coffin to see him tinkering away at a skeleton by lamplight, and then turns around to reveal 3 unusual masks rather than a proper face. However, instead of a powerful necromancer, which would have been a neat fight, he's insanely passive, like he doesn't even care that you're gonna kill him. Most people have him farther down, but comedic value and lack of frustration propel him to a less horrible spot just out of the dregs below.
Fellow Asylum Demon advocates, I hear ya. As you can see, I had him all the way up at number 12, but Alex and I agreed to disagree that the limited mechanics and overall mediocrity made him worthy of a lower spot. Not to say he isn't fun though, he's about as hard as you'd expect an introductory boss to be, meaning he's a pushover, and I think more importantly, he's a guide on how to play the game. When you first enter the arena, he comes flying in, you try to hit him, and do about as much damage as a scrawny fist to that juicy bootay should do. If you try to play it out doing 2 damage a pop, you're likely gonna slip up, but with a keen eye, you notice the small escape door at the far corner of the arena. And once you eventually re-enter the fight, fully equipped and all, you know to do a plunging attack, and from then on it's pretty basic. He's mid-tier damage but very low health, and all you gotta do is dodge the swings and bait that booty stomp for adequate time for hits. The Asylum Demon was the first ever boss in a Souls game for many, including myself, and for that, and that, this beefy buttocks tester of the Chosen One absolutely deserves some respect. I'm sorry, I just laughed.
I really did get all the joke bosses this time around, huh? This cross-dressing caster isn't exactly the most intense fight, but it at least has a pretty cool arena. Its use of the liminal space effect really makes you feel like you're in Gwendolyn's magic treadmill hallway. That's sadly the most praiseworthy part of the fight though. Attack-wise, he has little going for him. He can shoot 1 or 2 different spells at you and piss out arrows like a Tommy gun, which I never found to be too hard to avoid but apparently annoys a decent amount of people. Your goal here is to catch up to him in the hallway and take as many swings at him as you can before he teleports farther down. He shares a theme with the Moonlight Butterfly, which sorta makes sense as they're both magic users, but it still feels sorta lame that they go halvesies on the same track. Overall, I'd say it's not very engaging or fun, but it's not miserable either and is pretty unique, so it at least has a pretty defined identity apart from the other bosses.
The Taurus Demon feels like a framework in basically every aspect except visuals. Like I said, he looks cool, but otherwise he just swings around his great axe, dealing hefty damage for early game that's totally negated by the monster pot shots a +5 club with lightning infliction can do. Otherwise, the only thing that's really going on is the arena. It's a pretty cool bridge that oversees the rest of the Undead Burg and once again encourages thorough exploration. On top of the battlement, there are 2 undead archers who are accessible through a ladder. Taking them out not only makes it much more manageable, but also allows for you to bait the Taurus Demon into a plunge attack. Once you get him to drop down, you can run all the way back to the top and drop for heavy damage. Think same thing as the Asylum Demon, just more work. As another early game area filler, he gets the job done, while still being a solid boss, so personally a spot in the middle for the Taurus Demon is fair.
This unholy spawn of Seath and Guinevere is another unique fight, although it suffers from some of the hitches that often come from untread territory. She starts out invisible, which is a really cool idea, and it's fair since you can see her footsteps in the snow beneath you. There's only one problem. She tends to stay invisible even after you hit her, which as far as I know is a glitch, since in most of my fights one hit is enough to knock her out of that state back to being normally visible, but this happened to Jack twice. This isn't the worst thing ever since it's still a cool gimmick, but not ever seeing her makes the fight feel sorta weird since you're not really looking at her for a lot of it. Sister Fried did invisibility much better in Dark Souls 3, where it's more of a component of an attack than a standalone attraction. Priscilla's attacks are also sort of simplistic as well. In my fight with her, she did nothing but blow pitifully easy to dodge frost breath at me, and I know she swings her scythe sometimes as well, although that's not too interesting either. If not for the invisibility mechanic, she'd be pretty unremarkable, so as is, she holds up a steady middle of the road spot.
If Meh was a boss, then it'd be the Sanctuary Guardian. I mean, what is there to say? He flies around, shoots lightning out of his mouth and tail, has got a lion's head and a bull's body, and his background is that he's the guardian of the Olisau Sanctuary. The arena is unique visually but has no real impact besides a placebo that the lightning does more damage because it's on water, and I guess in a final note, do not come back. I dare any one of you watching this video to beat 2 of them at the same time. If you actually manage to do it, tag us on Discord using the account in the description and we'll shout you out in the next video. Now back to the ranking. As the first of 4 bosses in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, the Sanctuary Guardian was weak in comparison to its competition, but I like to think it was designed as an appetizer of sorts, without much of an attempt to advance mechanics, so a ranking smack dab in the middle is personally a fair spot.
Honestly, Nito is a pretty frustrating boss. It starts off with fall damage like the Stray Demon, he fights you with respawning skeletons, and his scream attack is pretty much a guaranteed magic blade up your butthole. This isn't even counting the annoying path to get back to fight him if you die. So why is he this high? A few reasons. 1, he just looks awesome. That's obviously not fair grounds for this placement alone, but it's worth something. As well as that, he's more fair than my initial tirade would lead you to believe. Nito's own AI is more on the passive side to account for the skeletons in his arena, and you'll never fight more than 2 of them as long as you don't wander to the far side of the room. His AoE attack is a heavy hitter but telegraphed pretty well. What's more, he actually damages his own goons, which is a really nice touch. So if he whiffs a sword stab aimed at you, there's a decent chance his bone buddies are going to take a dive, at least for a few seconds before they revive. Just make sure you actually do dodge that, since the thrust attack drains your health pretty swiftly. He also has a notable weakness to fire if you really want to shred him. He's not perfect, but the things I find annoying in this fight are at least intentional and not impossible to overcome. Good work, Skeleton.
Opposite the award, it is what we all know it is, and what the hell was Miyazaki thinking? I don't exactly want to know, so I'll just keep it plain and simple. She's a pussy dragon. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. The Gaping Dragon is quite the ferocious looking thing, but doesn't live up to its hairy demeanor. If you rub it just right, you can knock off its tail, which completely nullifies the fight as it removes its main point of attack. Otherwise, it's just a beast. It runs around, stomps, and gets wet. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's really not too interesting of a bad excusing looks in the fairly common tail cut off, but it's fun to play with, so a mid to high slot is exactly what I'll assume is a she deserves.
This guy fits into the category of Souls bosses I affectionately call goofballs. Bosses that are pretty easy and usually have a comedic aspect to them is probably the operational definition for it, but it's sort of hard to measure. All I know is that the Iron Golem fits cleanly into this camp. Jack and I both just find him funny. For starters, he can literally lose his balance and fall off the edge to his own death, and it's definitely nice to see someone other than the Chosen Undead suffer from gravity, the true hardest boss. If you decide to actually fight him instead of going for the ring out, he really isn't much harder. He can try to grab you at close range and shuck you, but he's not smart enough to aim for the edge, fortunately, so sometimes he just throws you down in a pretty safe spot to heal. His swings and wind slashes are nothing to write home about either. As long as you kill the guy lobbing bombs onto the arena beforehand, it's pretty rare you die to this guy, so I say just enjoy watching him stumble around like a doofus and take the ride to Anor Londo.
This guy, a dickless, scaleless, crystal pube dragon, was running a train on Guinevere, and, well, just don't look that up. Okay, anyway, Seath exists more as a lore element than a late game predicament, as he was granted Duke of the Archives and gifted a fragment of the Lord Soul by Gwyn. This is all because he turned on his own kind and acquired the Primordial Crystal, an ancient relic that makes the owner invincible. Which plays into the fight. He doesn't take any damage while the crystal is active, but once broken it's a matter of avoiding his attacks through audio cues. His windups are basically all the same, and since you're hitting him up close you can't even see them, so the screams and shouts serve as indication to run. Unless you're hitting his side tails or whatever they are, as that's just random chance whether or not he flips and decides to clip you into a wall. And I don't exactly recommend this strategy either, as what I usually do is bait him into breaking the crystal for an ample window to strike. By standing near it, he frantically scurries over and unintentionally breaks it, and once broken, he freezes in agony. From then, you simply hit him in the pubes as they take double damage and also have massive hitboxes. That being said, it's a high risk, high reward scenario, as he can unleash a flurry of attacks since you're right under his mouth, and they can do some serious damage if you're not careful, like so. And also, fuck those clams. They always sneak in during the first fight as there's no fog gate and are a major nuisance to deal with, you know, as bipedal clams with eye mouths should. But yeah, while being pretty fun and also pretty funny with the background story, Seath is nothing more than a notable lore point with an average fight for a Lord Soul.
A long time ago, I used to feel really bad about killing dogs in video games. I mean, I am a dog owner myself, and Jack's actually got 2 of them, so we are dog lovers here. But eventually I hardened my heart, and now that I've beat Dark Souls about 100 times, I don't really feel the same sadness over beating on this poor pooch. It's cool that you can meet him in the past and get an altered cutscene if you do though. That's a really nice touch that's easily overlooked since basically no one on Earth fights Sif after beating the entire DLC. The fight is pretty easy, with Sif having no real way to hit you if you stay under him. He does like to move around and he's pretty quick too, but it's not fast enough to feel unfair or out of place in Souls 1. Mechanically he's pretty simple, but him having 4 legs makes his movement stand out among the other bosses, which makes it a little bit fresher. His arena is actually one of my favorites, which appears to be based off the Hill of Swords from Berserk, which is a really neat nod to one of Dark Souls' primary inspirations. It makes sense I suppose since Artorias himself is based on Guts, and this is the Abyss Walker's own grave. Sif is definitely one of the coolest bosses in the game from a story perspective, and a fun one to take on to boot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the best cutscene ever. Actually, scratch that. Let's zone in on her lower half. Yeah, not so appetizing now, huh? Well, the spider is what makes the fight. Together, they don't have much defense apart from the extremely powerful AoE, and they only save time by jumping around and barfing out lava. Quelaag herself, as in what I'm assuming is the woman, can only swing her sword, which I actually heard is a really good weapon, but thanks to Dark Souls' brilliant upgrade system, I still don't know how to transfuse her soul. And otherwise, it's an early game boss, so low health, mid damage, and mid mechanics are expected. So yeah, while definitely having some of the best honkers in the series, the Daughter of Izalith is also a fair and fun yet challenging boss for early game, albeit a pushover with a decently upgraded weapon that serves her purpose as the guardian of most people's second Bell of Awakening.
Bet you didn't see this coming, huh? Originally, Jack was taking the odd-numbered bosses and I was going to do the evens, but we swapped since we agreed it'd be best if I explained some of the weirder picks like this one. Part of the reason I think Gwyn is overrated is I think his theme isn't really that good, which is why a lot of people dote over him. I'm not saying they should have gone with a Souls 3 style bombastic orchestral arrangement. I get that there's supposed to be a somber tone here. He's fallen from grace, become a Lord of Cinder rather than sunlight, blah blah blah. It's as simple as I just don't really think his theme is that good. Sue me. I also think gameplay-wise he's not too interesting. He mainly swings his sword or tries to grab you, which is definitely an iconic attack but pretty punishable. I in general think the discrepancy in his attack's difficulty to avoid is weirdly high, which makes this fight have the kind of variation you don't really want in a final boss. His swings are tricky to dodge, but if you're like me and just parry cheese him, he's easy as pie, which makes for a very anticlimactic end to the game. I know that I could fight him normally, but the Kiln of the First Flame is a very long area to run back through if I die, so I'm hardly incentivized to take my chances with the risky route. Now let me be clear that I still think he has much more engaging and fair moves than the majority of the bosses in the game. He's also the most important character in the series from a lore point of view, which is big in his favor. I just dedicated a lot of time to trashing on him to explain why I personally don't think he's all that great. Thanks for hearing me out.
The Bell Gargoyles are somewhat infamous among the Souls community, as for me, along with most others, they were the first true wall in the series. Depending on your level of experience and knowledge, collecting Titanite shards and soul farming to obtain a +5 base weapon early on is not at the top of your to-do list. This completely invalidates the fight, and I actually had to do it all over again in New Game Plus just to get ample footage to work with this script. Yeah, I was a bit overpowered. Okay, I've had sufficient time to mess around, but there's a reason the Protectors of the Bell are so high up. As you'll see later on, I call Ornstein and Smo the OG gank, but these guys are the original gank. Key difference, popularity versus continuity. Nonetheless, they are the ideal early game boss, as they not only introduced a new mechanic, but also were different from anything else and in turn invited fresh methods of combat. For one, it's the first ever gank where they were mechanically different, and also the arena is on a slanted roof. It actually would have been a key highlight if it provided blockage, but it doesn't. The fire magically forms over it and the gargoyles can just swing through it. The gargoyles themselves are different in that the first one is fully built, while the second went through a paper shredder, I think, and doesn't have a tail. And for the first half, it's just you versus thing 1. I always recommend cutting off the tail whenever possible, and this is no exception, as about a quarter of its moveset revolves around the tail axe. Otherwise, it doesn't have a lot of health, so at about the halfway point the second one enters the fray. As I pointed out earlier, it can do everything the other one can, but has a more fire-prone AI and tends to spray from a distance. This one is also a lot better to handle, as it's not as aggressive nor as costly to get hit by, not to mention it only has half a health bar. So yeah, as the first of many tried and true challenges in the Souls series, the Bell Gargoyles are commendable, enjoyable, and above all, iconic.
Jack and I debated this fight a lot, and came to a consensus that he's good at a 5th place rank. There are annoyances I'll acknowledge, to be sure. The Abyss, which is a super awesome area in my opinion, is admittedly sort of a hassle as arenas go, since it demands a ring slot be allocated to the Covenant of Artorias. If you're like most people, you probably just use the Fap ring and Havel's ring, and you can't really go and unequip the Fap ring, so you gotta unequip Havel's. This likely means you move like a slug and have to fat roll, or at the very least heavy roll. This is a pretty fair grievance. My counter argument is that this is a fight all about pure damage, so I wouldn't give a shit about weight anyways. I usually come in with full Havel armor and just tank everything and try to kill them as fast as possible before they start ganging up on me. A touch I really appreciate is that their halberds do drastically lower damage at close range, so if you stay close to them they can't just obliterate you with that. They can still grab you and suck your humanity out, as well as launch an absurdly long-lasting magic projectile, so they aren't just defenseless either. They're balanced well for all ranges, which is good because they love to spawn weirdly far away from you. Depth perception can make this fight a bit harder, but I think it just makes it cooler visually, so I never had a big issue with it. They're also one of the coolest looking bosses in the series in my opinion, with stoic, masked faces and a wraith-like body. Jack told me he thought the fight would be cooler if they were all different, and I actually disagree now that I think about it. That would be a lot of movesets to track for one fight, and would probably end up being sort of like that horrible Grave Robber gank from Dark Souls 2's Sunken King DLC. I gotta mention the question everyone asks though. Why are there more than 4 of them? I've had to fight like 6 kings before. Less catchy sounding name, I guess.
If Manus didn't have Bloodborne levels of speed, he definitely would have been better than our third, and arguably better than the second as well. But he is way beyond the capacity for this game, and it can get frustrating due to minimal reprieve. He's still great though, and the intensity is unparalleled, even for the DLC. Manus was presumably brought back to life by Kath, leader of the Darkwraith Covenant, and since his return had been looking for his broken pendant, hence why he made your way to Oolacile in the first place. Kath brought him back as Manus was the father of the Abyss, and kinda the whole reason for all this mess. But enough of the lore. High velocity and higher stakes make for a rave. The intimidation factor in this fight is second to none, and my god does he hit hard. That being said, he's got surprisingly fair hitboxes and iframes, not to mention a generally slim health bar considering his rate of fire and damage. But in recent trend, fuck that combo. I don't even know if you can dodge it, but I do know once you get caught in the whirlwind, you can kiss at least half your vigor goodbye. That hulked up slam alone deals out a solid quarter, and I haven't even got to his hex attacks. Most of them are dodgeable and pretty fair, but the one where he shoots it out and it closes in, forget about it. This is far and away the most difficult thing to dodge in the entire game, which is unfortunate as it's also one of the heaviest attacks in the series. But trust me, as pessimistic as I sound, you can take my word when I say Manus is great, and if anything, rightfully deserves the number 4 spot.
The first dragon fight in the series not to suck, Kalameet was surely a breath of fresh air to fans when this DLC first came out. He's got more going for him than just the classic dragon moveset too. His wings got shot out of commission by Hawkeye Go, so he's land-bound unlike most. To make up for it, he's also got psychokinetic powers that can even damage you in real life, assuming that headache that move gave me was intentional. This move's hitboxes can feel a little wonky sometimes, but I haven't had nearly as much trouble with them as Jack has. His generic dragon move still managed to be sorta flashy too. He can fly slightly up and breathe down a big circle of flame, or shoot a solid stream of it and move it towards you. Dodging this move always feels sorta cinematic, since you're usually sorta far away when he does it, which I like. He's sorta like Sif in the Gaping Dragon in that he's not too great at hitting you if you stick to his sides, but he puts up more of a fight than either of them do with some stomps at least. One odd thing to note about him is that he has insanely high lightning defense, unlike most dragons, which get shredded by it. The bosses in this DLC as a whole have incredible elemental resistance, but this one in particular is the least well known. I've still seen people on Reddit recommend first-time players to use gold pine resin on him because people just assume it hits him harder. You've got plenty of room to work with in this fight, which is also welcome in my opinion. A common denominator for a lot of great fights is an expansive, unrestricted arena, which this certainly is. This all makes for a consistently fun experience that is well deserving of cracking the top 3.
This is perfection beaten out by more perfecter perfection. As the OG gank fight, Ornstein and Smough are, no pun intended, lightning in a bottle. And unlike most other bosses in the game whose foray into new mechanical territory fell short, ONS revolutionized what a boss fight is and are the pinnacle of what this game was meant to be. And whether it's the fair difficulty, unique mechanics, or an overwhelmingly intimidating challenge, they nailed it. Looking back on older Souls YouTube videos, these two Guardians of the Milkers seemed like the big attraction, and that makes perfect sense. As opposites, Ornstein being the more agile, fast-paced warrior with Smough the rumbling, heavy-hitting giant, they were unheard of before, and it makes for a really unique take on the typical strong goon, soft goon approach and opens up for many strategies, the most popular being kill Ornstein always. For video's sake, I actually beat both, but yeah, killing Smough can be a real nuisance as he's pretty fat, which I guess is what happens when you chow dozens of humans, and in turn Ornstein simply isn't visible. And I'm bringing back the F-bomb one last time, fuck that attack in specific. If my memory serves me correct, I had never dodged the notorious infinite swing until this playthrough. And why they made it so high damage, some call it momentum, build up and inertia, but I prefer plain old bullshit. And ironic as it is, this only happens thanks to the fantastic arena design with the pillars. Excusing Ornstein's ignorance of Sir Isaac Newton's laws of motion, they are brilliant for crowd control, and even after smashed to bits, they serve their purpose as safe havens for Estus chugs and protection from Smough's charge. This is all the first phase, and the second continues with a souped up version of the one you kept alive, as depending on who was killed, the other gains their powers. Whether it be Smough absolutely pancaking his partner in crime for ass-imbued lightning, or Ornstein softly caressing his big-bellied fellow for a boost in size, it's awesome. Nothing of note really changes for Ornstein with the exception of a growth spurt and an attack that I'll call crap, but may also just be me sucking at telling the iframes, but Smough, like I said, permeates lightning out his asshole and hammer, but also keeps the same attack pool with the obligatory ass slam as a bonus. As the OG gank fight in this series, Dragonslayer Ornstein, Knight of Gwyn, and Executioner Smough, too cannibalistic for the Lord of Sinners' particular taste, are one of the greatest duos in gaming history.
At last, we've reached our number 1 pick, Knight Artorias, the Abyss Walker. He's up there with Gwyn in terms of lore importance, with his influence stretching an insanely long way down the Souls timeline up to Dark Souls 3. Artorias is, in my opinion, the biggest badass in the series. He's got my favorite kind of fictional rage power or whatever, which is just tanking pain. He literally fights you with a broken arm. He's handicapped to one-handing one of the biggest swords around and still kicks ass. There's this old video where someone recreated his sword in real life and a bunch of dudes tried picking it up, and only like one guy could even get it off the ground. It's pretty crazy. I also have a soft spot for him partly because I move like he does in fights for some reason. Whenever I spar with friends, I always have the same awkward lurching movement when I try to move after a punch, for better or for worse. So he's relatable too. As for the fight, it's also super fun. He's got a really wide move pool, good hitboxes, and is about as fair as it gets. He has his jumping flip move, which he can do anywhere from 1 to 3 times in a row, so I always just assume it'll be 3 to avoid getting beamed mid-swing. He can fling Abyss Gunk at you at close range and do some classic swings and thrusts as well. A unique feature which I love is, while it's not really an extra phase, every 25% of his health you chip off he tries to buff himself. It is preventable if you stagger him out of it, but if you try and fail you get punished with a big AoE attack. This has the dual role of being a fight-enriching mechanic and a great way to implement his backstory into the fight, which is awesome when well done. It's about Artorias going more and more insane and reaching further into the powers of the Abyss, showing his progressing madness and desperation fighting the Chosen Undead. I bragged earlier about not shedding tears over Sif, but I admit it is still sad for me seeing a character who's depicted as proud and honorable get pushed to using abilities they detest or avoid. Not that it was really voluntary in Artorias' case, but a great touch by FromSoft all the same. The only flaw I can even come up with for this fight is that his theme isn't very memorable, but it still fits him very well, so it's a minor gripe. With a perfect blend of great gameplay and powerful story backing it up, Artorias is unarguably the best boss in Dark Souls. Thank you all for tuning back in for the second of 5 Soulsborne boss rankings. This is our favorite gaming IP, and we've been looking forward to these videos for months, so expect the same quality for our next one, the bosses of Dark Souls 2 ranked from worst to best. Since that game has a whopping 41 bosses, it's gonna take a bit to make that video. So check back in next week for the second of 3 Metroid Prime boss rankings, this time the bosses of Metroid Prime 2 ranked from worst to best. Back to Souls 2, we're very excited about this one in specific, as honestly it's one of the top 3 Souls games in our opinion, which I think is overhated among its fanbase. Otherwise, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and with that, deuces.